Welcome to another exciting episode of the Business of Sound. My name is David Segura, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Glassbox Media and the host of this podcast. Our goal, as always, is to provide you with an inside look into the world of podcasting with actionable tips and strategies that will hopefully make your podcast better and your experience that much more pleasurable. Join us every other Thursday as we bring expert insights and exclusive interviews with some of the industry's leading voices. But before we get started, hit that subscribe button and give us a 5-star rating to stay up to date with all the latest episodes of The Business of Sound. In today's episode, we're going to be playing a conversation that I led with top brands about buying media within podcasting. This conversation actually took place in Las Vegas last March at the Podcast Movement. For those of you who don't know what that is, the Podcast Movement is a leading audio conference that brings together the very best of the world of podcasting twice a year. The next Podcast Movement is the upcoming in August in Denver and Colorado. Please reach out if you're planning to attend, as Glassbox Media has some exciting stuff and events in store for this major conference. In the meantime, enjoy my conversation about how to pitch large brands on podcast buying. Well, first of all, thanks everyone for being here today. We're really excited to have you. We know you have a lot of choices at this conference, a lot of meetings, a lot of work on top of that. But it's great that you're here to learn a little bit more about not just podcasting, but podcast advertising as well. So, for background, I started Glassbox Media in 2021 alongside my co-founders walking in the room right now, Chris, and a whole bunch of other folks. Previous to that, I was the founder of a company called Giant Media. We were very early called native video platform, and we were fortunate enough to obviously grow and eventually exit. Done a few other things too, including investing and also being involved with the Dog Whisperer catalog, which, I'm sure people still watch that show, hopefully. But, obviously I'm super jazzed up about podcasting and really excited about the panelists that we have here today for you. And, just a quick comment on Glassbox. A lot of you are wondering who exactly we are. We're essentially a podcast platform that works really closely with creators. What makes us maybe a little bit different from a lot of other companies in the space is that we work with them on an exclusive basis, almost like a Warner Music, a record label for star podcasters, if you will. And that's really been the mission. But as you're going to hear today, what's really interesting about the work that all the other panelists do at this panel is that they work really closely with podcasters to make sure that they're accomplishing goals for their brands. So with that in mind, what I want to do at this point is kick it over to the other panelists to maybe talk a little bit about themselves and even why they're here today at Podcast Evolutions. So maybe we can start with Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Granger. I'm the CEO and founder of Oxford Road. We are the leading independent agency that's focused on audio. We've been doing this. This is our 10th year in business, so we're glad to be here and appreciate the partnership with Glassbox and just think the world of really everybody on the team there. We have some very great relationships there, and they've been real partners to us, so happy to be here.
Too kind.
Hi, everyone. My name is Margaux. I am the Senior Audio Partnerships Manager at Athletic Greens, a company known for pioneering the foundational nutrition movement through our product AG1. Our podcast program is really focused on building long-term partnerships with an international set of audio creators and deepening our relationships with them as we scale. So excited to be here alongside these fellow panelists and very excited to hopefully meet all of you. Thanks so much.
My name is Glenn. I'm with Adopter Media. We're an agency that's been in the space for 7 years now. I've been in this industry for 13, and we rep a few dozen brands to place their ads across thousands of podcasts. And excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
And I know everyone already knows this, of course. I mean, you're here in part because podcasting is not only awesome, but it's growing pretty rapidly. So really what we're here to talk about is get into the nitty gritty, but it goes without saying that as radio continues to evolve, I'll say, put it nicely, podcasting will just continue growing more. And obviously with that happening, all sorts of brands are entering the space, from direct response to brand awareness. And so we're going to keep it very light, very informal, but we are going to go over, just some of the jargon because we want to make sure that everyone follows the conversation well and ultimately kind of knows the difference between all those things. So, and, we're going to discuss a few topics. We do have a lot of prepared questions, but I know the way the panels evolve, a lot of stuff will come up serendipitously. So excited to see where this goes. But we are going to be discussing, not only their careers, but their philosophies. And just to be candid, a lot of that may be different from each other. So I'm personally excited, and I think we're going to learn something. Hopefully some sparks will fly too. So we'll find out. With that in mind, we'll go ahead and just get the conversation going. Dan, I know it's pretty basic, but I want to ask you this question anyways. When you think about podcast advertising and where we're going as an industry, do you see this as a space that's really for direct response only, or do you also see it as something evolving to something broader?
It has to evolve into something broader. Direct response is a tricky word. We tend to refer to it as performance, but I come from a school of thought that all marketing, all advertising really is for the purpose of performance. What varies is the time horizon and how you measure success. So if I'm a brand, I want to be the first company you think of and feel the best about when the point of need arises in your purchasing decision, and that could be years away. That's fine. It's harder to tie that back to your vanity URL conversions because people forget basically as soon as they hear them. But I think there has to be room for both. I mean, anytime there's a new media type, the first thing they try to do is push out direct response because the awareness KPIs can be tougher to show impact with. And so I think there's lower hanging fruit. A lot of times the CPMs can be better. You're not just, selling so much remnant. And ultimately you can bring in a level of prestige that I think helps propel the brand forward. Podcast is a little bit unique in that we all live in the house that performance marketers built. The Silicon Valley built the podcast industry through direct-to-consumer brands. I mean, when we got into the business, we were working with Dollar Shave Club and ZipRecruiter and Hulu and all these scrappy startups, and it was novel that they could send razor blades to your door at that time. But it was those companies that really used it as their secret weapon and weren't following traditional media practices. They were willing to buy things purely based on the results that they drove rather than worrying about whether or not there was legitimate measurement structures in place. And as a result of that, it fueled their growth. And then as a byproduct, they then fueled the growth of the industry. So I think there always needs to be some reverence for the brands that got us here. I don't know if we're ever really going to see true direct response where we're selling catheters and gold at high volume across the ecosystem, but the performance marketers are here to stay. But the thing that I encourage networks to do in accommodating is creating space for both. Radio is around for 100 years and radio is evolving, but we can still learn from what came before. And radio had different types of units for different types of brands. Sometimes it's about a produced spot. Sometimes it's about a live read. Sometimes it's about a host read that's produced. Sometimes it's remnant. We need to embrace the fact that different types of advertisers have different needs and have lanes for each of them. Because what I see happening early is we go from an over-dependence on performance, and when we want to make space for the brands, we start taking away the things that the performance marketers need. Whereas I do believe there's a scenario where both can be accommodated. So I'll park there.
I tend to agree. This might be a good transition point to get Glenn involved. Glenn, you've been a veteran in the space for a long time now. You just mentioned 7 years. What I'd love to hear from you is maybe why you started Adopter Media, and to the extent you feel comfortable, just maybe some background on some of your marquee clients that you worked with either now or over the years.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I started in this business working for someone I've known for 30 years, Leo Laporte at This Week in Tech, the Twit network. And when I was there, I really learned about the power of the host-read authentic endorsement ad and seeing how a brand could come into the space and by partnering with an influencer like Leo, get these true testimonials that would incentivize the audience to take action based on the ads. And I loved that. In my mind, this was the most old school form of advertising, the most old school form of marketing. When you're listening to a podcast, you love that podcast host. Maybe sometimes you love to hate that host, but you're hanging on every word they say. It is literally the voice inside your head. It is a trusted friend. It is someone that's going to get you excited about something. And seeing that was, there was just a lot of potential. So for me, starting my own agency, building my team and figuring out how to scale that across thousands of opportunities. I couldn't have been more excited, still very excited and enthusiastic about this space. We work with dozens of brands. We've had a lot of brand awareness advertisers in addition to direct sell our clients. So we've worked with a lot of really great brands to help tell their stories. And at the same time, with direct response versus brand, direct response, I think is really binary. I mean, you want good attribution. I always point to the examples of Squarespace and a lot of these brands, Casper, Blue Apron, the start of the space. They did direct response ads, but they built brand awareness through this direct response, authentic endorsements. So what we've seen when larger brands come in, I think it's still a little more experimental because there is no true playbook to follow. And one thing I've found is they all have widely varying expectations in how they're going to approach this. And it is far less predictable than doing a performance marketing campaign.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's interesting, but I do think it's important to point out that I think you're both correct. There's space for both. So it's certainly exciting to see that evolve. Margaux, I had a question for you. And literally, when I think of Athletic Greens, there's so many things we can ask. But just to start at the more basic level, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your role with Athletic Greens and what that encompasses.
Yeah. So at AG, we have a really robust marketing team that's composed of our growth, creative studio, brand, communications functions. And I sit on our podcast channel, which is under our partnerships umbrella, where we're really focused on the creator economy, telling the story of AG1 off the platforms of so many amazing creators that we work with. We really want to empower them with a lot of product education and experience with the product themselves so that they then have the ability to speak about the way they use it, the way that it's impacted their lifestyle in their own words, and really bring kind of what they know best and those stories and those messages to their audience that they know will resonate.
Amazing. And also to you and everyone else here, happy Women's Day. Almost forgot, but I guess I guess another question, I did want to, kind of ask about, maybe gingerly walk into. It's relevant for everyone here, but also relevant to the panel, obviously. Dan, you've talked a lot about brand safety, and while that may be a little bit of a loaded question, and every brand, every agency is different, what do you think a brand, an agency, or even a podcaster should be thinking about in this marketplace where this seems like it's top of mind? It's like one of the hot topics of this medium now.
So I just did a session on this at 11 o'clock, so I have a lot to say on this topic. I'll try to keep it simple. I think our agency started really experiencing the impact of polarization all around us, and so much confusion and disagreement on so many issues that, I think we talk about brand safety and suitability, but what we're really talking about is people are having a hard time having discussions about important things in responsible ways. And as an agency, we started by doing our own podcast called the Media Roundtable, where we talk to talent, creators, networks, everybody across the ecosystem, and be like, how did we get here? How is this such a problem? How do we deal with it? Our thesis is that part of the solution is nutrition labels for media, so that brands can make sure there's alignment between their values and their business objectives. That's one piece of it. And we've partnered with a couple different groups. Ad Fontes Media, we worked with them to launch the media bias chart for podcasts. We work with Barometer to bring their technology to bring brand safety and suitability standards, so that, now when we work with a client, we assess their needs and their profile, and we make sure that there's agreement all the way through the media that they run. That's the state. That's the ideal state of the marketplace that we're in. But when it comes to your core question about advice, I think the tools are important. The tools are great, and it helps us measure and assess and show progress. But ultimately, everybody knows the answer to this problem. And it comes down to using your judgment and looking at the types of conversations we're having and asking ourselves in an honest way, are we building bridges or are we burning them? Are we having responsible dialogue or are we exploiting differences? And you don't need a tool to know that. It's already in your heart. You already have ears. You already have a mind. And if you're a brand, you need to be thinking about this. And you need to be thinking about the statements you made in the last 36 months about the stakeholders you're accountable to, and whether or not the media you're sponsoring is congruent with that. And if you're a creator, if you're a seller, we're going into an election cycle that's going to be ugly again. And what's your part to play in that? And are you bringing products forward so that we can start to demonstrate responsible conversations? Because people don't know what that looks like anymore. People don't know how to talk to each other. And our job is talking. And I'm going to go one more minute on this topic because you got me on my soapbox. But our president at Oxford Road, Stephen Abraham, sitting over here, pointed out to me this morning that we are at a hotel that was where Elvis had his last residency in Las Vegas. And that was the king of rock and roll. And here we are in Las Vegas having a podcast movement conference in Las Vegas. And in my view, I got into this business because I believe podcasts is the new rock and roll. I believe that this shapes culture. I believe that the conversations we're having matter. And I think we have an opportunity to have real impact. But what's happened is there's so much fear in the marketplace with consumers, with brands, with marketers, with businesses, that they've reduced it all down to topics, and we've made certain topics unmentionable. And what we're trying to advance, at least from our agency, is the notion that topics should not be unmentionable. It's all about how responsibly you handle them. And so my advice is take inventory, take stock. Technology is here and will only get more intelligent to identify who is responsible and who is not. And the marketing dollars, I believe, will start to follow that. So that's my advice to all the creators and networks and sellers in the room. Advocate for responsibility.
Well said. Okay, yeah,
Thanks.
claps. Acknowledgement. That said, though, this is an issue that obviously is different for different folks, and I definitely don't want to pressure anyone to put them on the spot, but I want to open up that same question and kind of get some thoughts from Glenn and Margaux potentially on how they think about brand safety and it impacts maybe their brand or, in Glenn's case, portfolio of brands.
I think that it's very important. Two things. One is you need to research who you're working with, right? I mean, and sometimes a simple Google search with controversy, allegations, there are ways just to find out if any influencer that you're working with has something that should be a red flag that should be talked about with the brand before going in. Additionally, listening to the content, I know it seems like the biggest no-brainer, but you can super sample a lot of episodes and get a sense of what a podcaster is talking about, communicate that to the brand, and see if they're comfortable. But I think the other half of the equation is that you really need to work with trusted network partners where there's the unknowable. There are things that might arise. There might be, the controversial opinions that we have right now and that we hear in 2023, back in 2019, weren't even on people's radar or something they even thought about. So I think it's important to work with trusted network partners to know that if a controversy does arise, you're going to be able to pull the ad, edit the ad out of past episodes if it's an episodic placement, and make sure that you're able to really contain any damage in an unforeseeable catastrophic event of working with someone that just goes off the rails and is really out of left field. So I think it is really about providing as much information as possible so brands are making smarter choices, but then also working with people that have your back.
I effusively agree with your statement about working with trusted network partners to not only make sure that you have the protections in place should something go awry, but also to kind of understand the history of the creator or the history with their brand partnerships to understand if something like this has come up before. And many network partners will tell us, like, we've seen it all. And so we trust them. And we want to make sure that we're having those types of transparent conversations. I would also add that kind of understanding the scope or the potential round robin of guests that might appear on the show is something that's really important. And understanding the reflection or lack thereof of the guest on the actual host. And then a little bit tangentially, but something really interesting that came out of the Sounds Profitable, Tom Webster and Brian Barletta's research on brand safety a couple of months ago was the true understanding that audiences of a trusted host have when there is a one-off issue or a blip in an episode, and their strong likelihood to return to that content should it be that one-off issue. So from a brand's perspective, being flexible, being understanding of that, having the protections in place to withdraw or reallocate or move things around. I think flexibility is a big piece. Nobody wants to pull the plug immediately, and everybody kind of wants to make sure that when it's a long-term partner, they're taking that history into consideration and making sure you're able to move forward productively.
That's awesome. So it seems like you covered a lot of ground, not only vendors that people can use, but one thing I really got from Margaux and Glenn's answer was that it requires trust. You have to work with partners, podcast networks, different folks that you can rely on, and when stuff hits the fan, if you will, that they'll react accordingly. You would assume that's the case, but it's not always, doesn't always play out that way. So good to hear. Margaux, one other thing I wanted to ask you about too is there's this fascinating article last summer in the New York Times about athletic greens. Obviously, I'm sure everyone in the audience knows about athletic greens. It's impossible to escape. But in the article, largely glowingly, they basically really credited the podcasting and audio channel for a lot of athletic greens growth. So what I want to ask you is, just in your own opinion, tell me a little bit more about the philosophy of athletic greens, and to the extent you feel comfortable sharing, how integral is podcasting been to actually building this, very large brand?
Key phrase, impossible to escape. Thank you. I would say that a large kind of portion of kind of that New York Times article crediting a lot of our scale and our growth to podcasts was highly complimentary, and we're psyched to see that, and it is definitely a core marketing channel in our mix. I'd say what has really made the medium kind of ripe for our scale in that way is that the supplement industry is so confusing, historically so complicated, so much skepticism surrounding it, that when you have a trusted host recommendation, that offline real estate is highly precious and highly coveted and limited. So it's something that we take really seriously. And also there's kind of like a lot of speed and agility in order to, capture those impressions. But when you think about an industry that is surrounded by so much skepticism and so much confusion and opaqueness, that hearing from a person that you respect or that you admire or that you are entertained by for possibly an hour a week, possibly for multiple years, telling you that this is something that they put into their body every single morning, it powers their day, it makes them feel amazing. Maybe they've given it to friends and family, they love it, they've seen the impact of it. That is so valuable as a product in this space, as a company that's focused on empowering people to take ownership of their health. That is so unique about the industry, that we have that warm introduction to the brand, that trusted recommendation that we see as gold, and is something that is so special that podcasts can provide.
Well, the proof is in the pudding, and Athletic Greens is definitely utilizing the industry really well. So that's awesome to see. I know most people in the audience probably already know this, so don't mean to be redundant or waste anyone's time, but I know for a lot of folks that are approaching media, they do wonder, what's the difference between maybe approaching a BetterHelp or Athletic Greens directly versus working with an agency? And some folks even kind of think that one is better than the other, where, the reality is just different. So I guess the question I want to ask, and I want to start with Glenn maybe, is kind of in your own words, how would you describe the role of the media agency within podcasting, and why is it critical to the space?
I think one thing that an agency really provides is the expertise of giving you a huge head start in knowing who the winners and losers are, where the engagement is, what are the good opportunities, what are the opportunities that should be avoided at all costs, because we've done it, 100 times over and have that experience. But from a podcast point of view, I do think some podcasters really want to pursue higher level integrations. They're trying to cross-sell newsletter sponsorship, social media, a more bespoke package. And in some cases, smaller podcasters would have more success going to a direct brand, because with an agency, and I explain this to podcasters all the time, that, a lot of these larger brands look at these opportunities as value adds rather than something they want to pay for. They really want that additional love as part of their standard CPM they're playing for a 60-second mid. So I think on the agency side, we do like working with podcasts of all sizes. We are looking for larger opportunities to help scale in the medium. But on the smaller end, if you're a unicorn podcaster that can do a strong direct response, do really authentic ads, and do really meaningful ad reads, as an agency, we absolutely love you, because we can then turn around and put 24 clients on your podcast and share that opportunity with them. And if you're a larger podcast, it's the same thing. I mean, we're always looking for those opportunities that work at scale. And it's really about finding tangential fits where we can get one advertiser, 5 advertisers that all go towards the same demographic and can find that same success.
One thing I want to do too is get into war stories. We all have a lot of success. We can keep it super positive, but we can also talk about maybe challenges that, we faced and essentially how we overcame them. So Dan, maybe starting with you, to the extent you're comfortable sharing, I mean, you've had a lot of experience working with some amazing clients. Everybody in this room, I'm very certain, knows Oxford Road. What was a challenge that maybe you guys faced in the last few years that you felt that the team has not only overcome, but maybe even turned into a strength?
I'll give you a couple short ones. I mean, I already talked the brand safety topic to death because I do think that was one where brands just didn't really know where to start, and there were a lot of arbitrary decisions. So, we put an inordinate amount of time. We just put a lot of energy and resources behind trying to create a solution that wasn't there. Right now we're in the throes of, I think, partnering with third parties like Podscribe and others who are in the verification side of the business so that you can find out, like, do we have frequency caps? What's the ad load? Where am I falling within shows now that ad loads are increasing as the market moves? I do think that the early thrash with the first 90 days of COVID and the last 90 days have been kind of existential threats to all of us for a minute, where we go, wait a second, what's happening here? Are we all in a lot of trouble or not? And I think we're all in some amount of trouble, but some of us in more trouble than others. And so, I think for Oxford Road, as we started seeing signals over the summer of where things have been headed and that we're probably running into a correction territory, whether or not the market is in a recession, media is in a recession, tech is in a recession, podcast is very dependent on these two constituencies, right? So there's a challenge that we're facing, but I think everybody in the room is facing it. And for me, I think it was a good time to take stock. And we really started auditing every process, every investment, every way that we were spending energy, and going, are we focused on our core? Does it all ladder up to our mission? And where have we gotten so busy that we've lost discipline? And I think on a company level, and then on a department level, and on an individual by individual level, we've really done a lot of hard looks in the mirror to say, what changes can we make? How do we do something? And we are finding innovation within our firm. So last anecdote, we started an innovation contest, which we do awards for innovation every year for our team, but we decided to do an early innovation contest within the last couple of months, and basically crowdsourced from our team and said, hey, we're going to give you some perks if you find ways to make your job more efficient, make our company more efficient. And we're going to let you win a big prize if you're in the first, second, or third place. We have found people innovate and shave tens of hours, and in some cases, hundreds of hours a month off of things that we were doing manually, that now technology is in a place that we can borrow from over here and move it over there and find real opportunity. So what I'm seeing is, for us, we're also in a bit of a buyer's market. I think we were in a little bit of a seller's market for a few years. Now I think we're shifting into more of a buyer's market. I think that opens up opportunity. I think some of the challenges we were talking about, brand versus performance marketers, I think there's a lot of room for both right now, whereas a lot of performance marketers were starting to feel squeezed on some properties. So there is so much opportunity right now to separate the wheat from the chaff, and for the good ones to rise to the top, whether you're a creator or a seller or an agency or a brand. There's real opportunity in front of us, but I think discipline and focus is really the key, and that's been very valuable for our agency.
Similar question, I guess, for both Margaux and Glenn. Very curious to know, like, what you're proud of in terms of your team handling, or even you handling in the past few recent years.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. This industry has been so up and down in the last 3 years, and I think every time there's a panic, about, oh my God, the sky is falling, very quickly we start to see, here are the opportunities. And we've actually grown our team since the start of COVID. We were a 3-person shop pre-COVID. Now, including myself, we're a team of 7. And I think that our team has just continues to do an amazing job in making sure that every client gets the same high level of service. We do onboarding calls with every podcast that we work with across every client. We negotiate the best rates possible to make sure that our clients have the best edge to set up a recipe for success. And I think it's just really that attention to detail. And every time, it's interesting, the ebb and flow, right? Because you'll have, a year ago at this time, it was crazy amounts of money, interest, rates going up, more brands wanted to get in the space. And then last summer we saw this slowdown. So I think that it's hard to make like true forecasts, but I would say always prepare for the worst.
I would add, I think a big focus for us over the past year and in 2023 is leveling up our ways of working with our partners. And as we continue to scale and grow with these individual networks and publishers, that we're getting really clear on our expectations, on their opportunities, having really consistent collaborative sessions where we know our testing campaigns are going in the right direction, that we know our long-term renewals are really set up for success, and that those can be really kind of bespoke and curated conversations to make sure that we know everything that's available to us and make sure that we're on the path to growth with our networks, and that they also know that we're being held accountable for, consistent creative refreshes and different opportunities that we have in-house to elevate our creators. And that has gone such a long way in just unlocking a lot of elevated performance, and also testing, scale, connections, introductions to other brands that we work with, bringing more brands into the space, which is really, really healthy. And that's a huge focus for us in 2023, and I think is really important. That's not lost as we continue to kind of mature in the space as far as technology and advancements go.
To build on that, there's something I want to ask basically all three of you. I want to hear your perspectives on it. So I know there's a lot of people in the audience that, whether they work at a media company, they're podcasters or network executives, they want to know, like, what does it really take to win the confidence of like a marquee brand client? That's certainly Athletic Greens, and it's certainly a lot of Dan and Glenn's, clients. So in your own words, like, what does it take to actually execute a substantial campaign and gain the trust of your brands?
You want me to start? Sure. All right. I think there's probably 3 things. A quote I used earlier was Howard Schultz said that the price of entry to being a values-driven company is financial performance. And I think that's true in what we do. Like, we can talk about how great a show is, how it resonates with, the ads are part of the fabric of the show, and the hosts are engaged and they use the product, and they're so passionate in the reads, right? We value these things. But at the end of the day, there are apathetic hosts that drive great response, and there are people that give it all they have, and it's terrible, and it's sad, because you want them to win. So at the end of the day, how an ad performs is what decides what's worth purchasing against the KPIs. I think most of the business is still trying to measure some indicator of performance, even if it's not all, immediate CPA. There has to be a result. You have to perform against that. The second thing is, we talked a little bit about the brand safety suitability. Safety is brakes, suitability is gas. And I think the gas is the good part. It's about moving toward things that line up with who you are as a brand. And we can talk about demographic targeting and all the sophisticated stuff that programmatic's going to usher in. But at the end of the day, I think the values alignment piece is really important. If the creator embodies the same values that the brand holds dear, that's going to work itself out as a really successful campaign that people are going to feel good about, provided there's performance. And the last thing, quoting my president again, he's always talking about SOGAS, which is like share of give a shit, right? Like, how much do you care? How bad do you want the business? Will your talent show up to the onboarding call when you set it up? Or is it all through a producer and we all kick it down to somebody lower on the totem pole who's not really deeply engaged? Or do they act like their life depends on it? If this is their primary source of income, like, do they treat it that way? And does the network care if it's working? And do you sit down at the table before you cancel something and go, hold on, why don't we try these 4 things and give it one more shot? And if you don't have that, it doesn't matter. You can set everything else up right, but things aren't all going to come easy for every brand. And it's that ground game. It's gaining those extra inches that are going to determine the outcome. And that's just something you can't replace. And the good news is it's there for anybody who wants it, but you have to care.
I would say, as far as earning trust from a brand goes, I would say the biggest thing, and that really holds the most weight in so many of our partnerships, is getting really clear and really quick on when something is not working. And when something's not working, that rarely means it's got to go away immediately. It just means that we're opening up the space to get really crafty, to get really creative, and to have really visible and transparent feedback. There's so much good that can come from that. It earns so much trust as far as the partnership goes. And it also provides really tactical and employable methods to use on campaigns in the future when you have a similar type experience. That is kind of part of the fun of it. And that also, I just think, extends the time period in which you're working with a partner, and also the breadth of content that you can work with when you know that that person is so reliable and trusted, and willing to have those conversations frequently.
I would say right now, if you are not in the top 1% of podcasters and your show is not at least 90% sold out, if you have a list of additional things you can do to make a partnership work, do it proactively. Do not wait for me to come to you and say, performance is a little soft. What can we do? Because we might have to cancel. You need to be doing these things now. Given that people are tightening their belts, given that people are scrutinizing performance, stay ahead of that and really give it your all if you want to win long-term business.
Well said. On that note, what I want to do is make sure that we also get the audience involved too. We want to stop and pause a little bit for questions. We got a little less than 5 minutes. Hopefully we can go a little bit over, but want to open it up to the crowd.
Hey guys, thank you so much for taking the time to kind of explain things from the brand perspective. I was wondering if you could give us any advice for smaller podcasters or independent podcasters on how to pitch themselves to brands and how to find brands to contact that might be open to working with them.
How small are we talking?
I don't know.
Because it kind of depends.
Let's say, 10,000 downloads per episode. Yeah,
I mean, you're at the right place, because I think there's a lot of people competing for talent that are engaged and growing. I think that, as an agency, we try to figure out what's the threshold. The reason I asked the question, I think there's a threshold below which it's probably not worth the time that it will take to execute the campaign to get a brand involved individually. And if you're managing a campaign on behalf of a brand, you're only going to be able to look and vet so many shows. There's only so many hours a day. We have 4 million podcasts. What are you supposed to do? So people set their thresholds differently. I think as an agency, we look at long tail shows that are, in the thousands. But there does need to be a story there. But I would say if you can get somebody who is a good, effective salesperson to personally represent you and take you to brands that you think are a fit, don't just go for the biggest brand. Go for the one that's the right brand that you think you can do the best job for. And off of that success will beget success. So I think find the ones that are the right fit for you and kill it for those companies. And the rest are going to find out about you, and you're going to have a great case study to share with the world. So I would start there and be flexible up front. Don't make it about the money first. A lot of people came into the podcast business thinking it was going to replace their income. And they're going to find out in the next 12 to 24 months that that is not possible. There's a lot of great content. There's a lot of content worth listening to. But there's 4 million podcasts. So we only have so many hours in the day. And what's going to happen is a lot of people that came in to use podcasts as a revenue driver are going to go, actually, it's an extension. It's content marketing for our company. And that has a secondary value, but it's not always going to be because you get a good CPM and you're able to pay your mortgage on that. It's going to be because it opens up conversations and access to small audiences that are going to see that you're engaged in having conversations and really professional at doing another thing or selling another thing. And I think once we can see those things lining up a little more clearly, that's going to be more obvious to you. But at 10,000, I think you can definitely make somebody successful and parlay it.
Thank you so much. Very great information all around. Question, sort of from a fiction podcast standpoint. I've been doing that for a long time, and I wondered if you thought there was any place, back in the, 50s, 60s when they did audio drama stuff, they would have like a brand presents this audio thing. With the evolution of better quality audio, better mixing, all of those things, is there a place where a brand would want to get on board with a fiction podcast in terms of if, Kellogg presents blah, 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 their name is associated with that podcast forever instead of ad placements, so they always get that brand, or branded podcasting in the sense of a fiction show that takes place in Target, and so Target is represented through the brand that way, and they can tell their own stories and blah, blah, blah. Is there a place, do we see that?
Yeah, so I think with fiction, it is tough, right? And I even think it's tough with narrative documentaries sometimes. I can love content, I can love interviews, but I don't necessarily feel that connection to the host where I care about their personal experience. So I think you're on the right path in terms of doing more creative integrations. I would say in a time when money is flowing, that's a great time to get that in front of brands because they're going to want to experiment. But right now, yeah, I would be really creative and figure out a way that you can make it such an enticing opportunity from both a price and content point of view that a brand feels, okay, even if this doesn't perform, we're going to be very satisfied with the content. In fact, maybe the way you can structure that is actually doing a deal where you say the brand can then use that ad on social media or in some other medium to entice them to take more of a risk if it's not going to be as high engagement direct response.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the presentation. It was awesome. I have a question. If there was a podcast that was doing 300,000 downloads a month, what are some things that would be holding back it getting sponsorships?
I'll let the panelists answer, but I will say if that's what you're doing, I definitely want to talk to you later. So,
Yeah.
It might be your approach. It might be your pricing. It could be your offering. I like to say that when you're pitching a brand, that make as much as possible on the table. So it's like almost an a la carte offering. To Glenn's point about being really flexible and being able to draw in new things proactively, I think is really important. And letting the brand kind of come to you and say, this is what we're looking for. And then you, from your own perspective and knowing your own audience and community, able to kind of like craft that offering to something that could really work for them.
yeah, we're getting the signal. So thanks everyone for being here, and I hope you enjoyed it.